attrition and also like what you need from employees. Like I think if you think you're going to be scaling as a leader, I think hiring for adaptability is actually one of the most valuable things you can look for over any other specific skill, because what the company is and how the company works is going to change. And you need to have people in the organization who are okay with that, who are okay with working on different things, with working in different ways, and who are going to help you sort of adapt and grow as a company as it changes over time. Employees who want things to stay the way that they are have value, but it doesn't work in a company that's scaling.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have a real product expert in Emily Levada. So welcome, Emily.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So we'll hear a bit about how Emily got into product management, into senior roles, but just from a high level, she started her product career at Amazon, then going to Wayfair for close to a decade. And most recently, she was Chief Product Officer and then Chief Executive Officer at Embark, which is a scale-up e-com brand. So maybe, Emily, first off, welcome to the show. Very excited to do a deep dive on product management. And maybe we start off by learning a bit more about a career journey from your own words.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a theater kid at heart, and I came up doing theater, got a college degree in theater production, and picked up a second major in psychology. And I like to say theater and psychology are both studies of how individuals behave, one scientific and one artistic. And I had a career in professional theater production in a role called production management. I was always a technophile and I wanted to get into technology. I wasn't sure how to do that. And so I went to get an MBA and ended up discovering product management and doing my internship at Amazon. And what I learned is that the conversation that happens between a set designer, carpenter, and a scenic painter is exactly the same conversation that happens between a UX UI designer, a backend engineer, and a front-end engineer. And product management was a great fit. Ended up at Wayfair and stayed there, as you said, for close to a decade, learning sort of all over the business. I moved from operations to merchandising to the core product and then into logistics, product management, and design before moving to Embark most recently.
Love it. I love it. As we were preparing, I was checking out your LinkedIn and some of the show notes, and I'm very curious. We talked a little bit about the trust equation. Could you maybe talk to us a bit about what is the trust equation?
Yeah, sure. The trust equation comes from a book called The Trusted Advisor by a guy named David Maesters and some others. And the trust equation is basically a framework that helps people understand what trust is made up of. And it basically says trust is made up of four things, which I can tell you about. But it was so important to me. It resonated with me so much and has become a tool in my toolkit because it takes this really fuzzy and abstract and sort of emotional concept of trust and breaks it down into tangible, quantifiable things that we can much more easily talk about in a business context. And so as an example, the first component of the trust equation is credibility. And that's basically, do you know what you're talking about, right? And that's something that we can understand and we can get feedback on, right? So like we can say to someone, hey, like when the CEO asked you that hard question in that meeting and you said, I don't know, but I'll get you an answer by the end of the day, like you really helped your credibility, right? Or on the other hand, like when the CEO asked you that meeting in that hard question in that meeting the other day, and you bullshit your way through the answer, like, and then had to backtrack because it became clear you didn't really know what you were talking about, like you really hurt your credibility, right? And really what we're talking about is like, does the CEO trust you or not? But it makes it much more easy to have that conversation, right? The second component is reliability. Like, do you do what you say you're going to do? A lot of people talk about this as the say-do ratio. And that's also like super easy for us to understand. You said you were going to deliver something by a certain date, like you did or you didn't. And that's easy for us to get feedback on. And what that feedback cycle helps us do is understand what behaviors are adding to or subtracting from trust in the organization. And so if we teach the trust equation to our employees and we give feedback to them using the trust equation, what we're doing is we're encouraging them to take behaviors, to do behaviors and take actions that increase trust in the organization. And we're discouraging them from taking actions and engaging in behaviors that decrease trust in the organization. And it just like makes building trust into a much more thing that we can accomplish in the normal course of business without having to like go on retreats and do trust falls and like have deep conversations, right? Does that make sense?
Makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, like, how are you relating this to product management and how brands interact with their customers?
Yeah. So the other two components of trust, one is basically like this idea of sort of discretion or like intimacy. Can I trust you with like my emotions or with secrets, right? And the last is basically self-orientation, which is like, or like other orientation. Like that's basically like, can I trust your motives? Do you take into account the impact on me when you make decisions? Do you have my best interest in mind? And when I think about what makes up trust between a company and customers, particularly an e-commerce company and customers, it's really the same things, right? So when I would think about how is Wayfair building trust with customers as the leader of the core funnel, like the core product funnel, well, is our credibility? Do we know what we're talking about? That basically is, are our product descriptions accurate? Like, do we have all the right information? Do we tell you the right things? Do we set the right expectations? Are we experts? If you call our customer service department and ask them questions, do they know what they're talking about? The second reliability is, do you get your things on time, like undamaged? It's what you expected to get, right? Did we do what we said we were going to do? This piece about discretion, right? You're trusting us with your personal information, your payment information. Are we handling that with care? Particularly, right, in today's world where security leaks happen all the time. And then the last piece is when something goes wrong. Do we do what's best for you or do we do what's best for us? And those are the same things that are building trust in individuals in the organization and that I'm thinking about as a manager of a team. But it's also what I'm thinking about when I'm considering, am I doing what's right for the customers? Are we as an organization doing what's right for the customers? Or how could we be doing better by them? How could we be building trust with them? It comes back to these same things: credibility, reliability, discretion, and the reduction of self-orientation.
I love that framework. And you'd mentioned this a bit earlier as well. Part of product management is, especially in large organizations, is coordinating the front-end developer with the back-end developer, with the designer, with the analytics team, with everyone who has kind of a stake in whatever project you're working on. And I even see it in our organization, product managers. We say it like they help herd the cats. They help everyone kind of get towards the end goal. So maybe talk to us a bit about some tactics on how to do that in larger businesses, especially now in the whole call it hybrid world, where there might be pocket offices. Maybe the back-end engineers are in Boston and the product teams in Michigan, and people are dispersed a little bit. Talk to us a bit about some of the tactics on how you're able to seek alignment, seek buy-in, and coordinate cross collaboratively.
Yeah. So I mean, certainly we have to be much more intentional about it in this world where people are remote, distributed, because you're not just getting information right in the context of the office. It used to be that you could learn a lot about what was going on just by sort of wandering through the office, overhearing, listening to phone calls, hanging out in the kitchen, right? Chatting with people on the walk through the hallway after a meeting. And so we have to be more intentional. But back to the larger question, I have this philosophy that product management is all about managing tension in an organization. If there was no tension, you wouldn't need product managers. Everybody would know what we should build. The engineers would build it. The marketers would sell it. And like, you wouldn't need a team of people whose job it is to manage the tension between the business and the customer, or between, marketing and science, which was right attention in my last job at a life sciences company, or the tension between, cheap, fast, and good. That's the sort of like classic tension that you have in engineering. And so I feel like a lot of what product managers do is really bring structure and bring decision-making to all of these various tensions that exist in a business. I think that in order to do that, it's important that you understand what all of the various stakeholders are trying to get, what they're trying to accomplish, right? That starts from a place of believing that everybody has good intentions, everybody's trying to do what's best for the business, but different people have different ideas of what that means or of what's most important. And so understanding where everybody's coming from really allows you to do that last piece of the trust equation, which is take other people's point of view into account as you're making decisions. Now, that's not the same thing as making a decision by consensus, which is a killer when we're trying to move fast and is not what we're trying to do. But as a product manager, being able to come into any cross-functional situation and say, okay, I understand you're trying to get this and you're trying to get this and you're trying to get that and you're trying to get that. And like, here's what's best for the business and here's what's best for the customer. And I'm going to take all those things into account and I'm going to triangulate the solution that's going to give us the best, right? That doesn't mean that you are specifically going to get what you want. But we as an organization are going to get what's collectively the best for us. I think in a remote world, it requires a lot more dedicated and intentional communication. It requires more conversations, more targeted conversations with partners saying, explain your point of view to me, help me understand why you want this and not that. It requires a fair amount of documentation and asynchronous communication. I think writing becomes a much more important skill in the distributed, particularly distributed across time zones world. But ultimately, I think it all comes back to that piece of understanding what everybody's trying to accomplish and where we're trying to head it as a business and what's going to be valuable to the customer. And then building enough trust that when you as a product leader say, this is what we're putting our resources towards, people understand why you made that decision.
How critical is it to frame it around the objectives of the business in your experience? Like ensuring that, hey, like you mentioned, you're trying to triangulate goals within departments and not losing sight of what the business's goal is, whether it's efficiency or growth, or curious how that plays in your experience.
Yeah, and it's incredibly important. I mean, I don't think anything that a product or engineering team is doing should be able to be understood in terms of how it's benefiting the business and the business's core goals. And I think that product strategy and product goals should follow directly from the business's goals and be the place where we start to understand, okay, how can we solve the right problem for the right customer at the right time in ways that create value for the business.
I love how simple you put it in true product management fashion. Emily, I'm curious, you've obviously been a part of a couple different scaling stories. Wayfair is a big one, Embark as well. What are some of the key kind of learnings that you take away from those rides?
Yeah. Scaling is a ton of chaos. Like it is not, it's funny. I talk a lot about, I use the blitz scaling approach, which there's a book called Blitz Scaling now, but the book didn't exist when I was in the middle of blitz scaling at Wayfair. And just to give you an example, so I was with Wayfair from about 800 or 900 employees to about 17,000 employees. I had a team in 2014 that went from 10 to 60 in 4 months, just to give you a sense of how fast we were scaling and that is blitz scaling, right? And blitz scaling has a very, it has a war connotation, right? It has a blitzkrieg connotation. And that's often what it feels like. And in some cases, there's just no way around that. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, it's messy, it's chaotic. I will say one thing that I learned being with Wayfair over a decade and over a number of cycles is that there's a moment as a broader organization. There were a couple times where Wayfair hit a point where 60% of the employees had a tenure of less than a year. And that is when the wheels come off the bus. If you can imagine that, like you're new, there's 2/3 chance that, your immediate peer is new. There's a 2/3 chance that your boss is new. And it's the blind leading the blind. And what happens is the people who actually know what's going on at the company, who hold the culture of the company, they are now spending all of their time just trying to help keep everything moving forward, that essentially no work gets done until a reasonable number of those people have sort of onboarded and are productive. And so I would say there's some limit, right? And for Wayfair, it was probably around like 50%. Right, of employees have a tenure of less than a year that an organization can truly handle in terms of how fast they can scale. And so I think there's always this balance between like moving so fast that it's uncomfortable and like really going off the track, if that makes sense.
Really, really interesting insight. I never looked at it like that. But yes, that would be pretty scary. And that could be a symptom of to your point, blitzscaling or even attrition as well. Right. And it's usually, I'm sure those things are tied hand in hand in some cases. So that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Attrition and also like what you need from employees. Like I think if you think you're going to be scaling as a leader, I think hiring for adaptability is actually one of the most valuable things you can look for over like any other specific skill, because what the company is and how the company works is going to change. And you need to have people in the organization who are okay with that, who are okay with working on different things, with working in different ways, and who are going to help you sort of adapt and grow as a company as it changes over time. Employees who want things to stay the way that they are have value, but it doesn't work in a company that's scaling. And those people end up becoming really uncomfortable and have a really difficult time adjusting as the organization changes around them.
No, that's really good insight. Maybe we should have opened up with this next one, but what do you think the role of a product manager is in e-commerce? Like, what do you think some of the kind of key roles, key responsibilities, and when companies are hiring these types of roles?
Yeah. So I already told you, I think so much of being a product manager is about managing those tensions. And I think in e-commerce, there are a couple that come to mind. So as an example, e-commerce always going to have some sort of catalog management, right? And the larger a marketplace you are, the larger that catalog is going to be. And that's always going to have inherent tensions in it. There's always going to be, for example, this tension as an e-commerce company, as a marketplace, between owning the experience and owning how products are merchandised, how you display content to the customers, what your imagery looks like, and passing off that responsibility to your vendors or your suppliers. And that is going to change as you scale. When you're small and you have a relatively small catalog, you can own and control a lot of what your experience is like. As you scale the number of vendors on your platform, you are not going to be able to exert that amount of control, or if you try to, you're not going to get economies of scale out of it. And so your ability to now switch from being an organization that is managing an e-commerce experience to being an organization that is creating tools to help vendors manage their e-commerce experience is, like, I think, a fundamental shift that a lot of companies go through. And one that, when I'm thinking about what makes people really great in e-commerce, or who really understands e-commerce, right? It's often people who get some of those things. They've been through those experiences. They understand some of those trade-offs. But it's always, e-commerce is always sort of, there's so much minutia, in managing a catalog of products. And there's the whole e-commerce experience that is not managing the catalog, that is, having a product detail page and having an add to cart button and having checkout. But at the end of the day, really successful e-commerce companies, that's the technology product you're building, but it's not the product you're selling. The product you're selling are the products in your catalog. And so I'll give you an example that was a pet peeve of mine. Wayfair sells furniture, and we sold cribs. And cribs are somewhat interesting as a piece of furniture. Actually, all beds are somewhat interesting in that the dimensions are standard, right? Mattresses are standard size, crib mattresses are a standard size. And adult beds have a little bit more leeway because they're often sort of decorative. But cribs are not. Cribs are basically the same length and width. All cribs are basically the same length and width within 3 inches either way. And for some reason, this was, 10 years ago, it was always true that about a third of the cribs in our catalog had the length and width reversed. And so, and now you could ask, why does that matter, right? Because maybe customers probably aren't searching by length and width. If they're standard, they might not be searching. But a couple of things are true. One, I think parents have a lot of anxiety about, I got a crib mattress. Is the crib mattress actually going to fit in the crib? Because they don't necessarily understand how standardized the cribs are, or they don't really understand the difference between a mini crib and a standard crib. And there are some nuances. I learned this the hard way. I had twins, and I had to all of a sudden fit 2 cribs on one wall, and I needed a crib that had no decoration. I needed the crib that was the closest to the mattress dimensions, because I only had 104 inches and I had to fit 2 cribs. And so there are these use cases where all of a sudden it matters to some customer that you have this piece of data right. But like somehow as a big company, you can never get those little pieces of data right because solving that one problem of like length and width of cribs was like never going to rise to the top of the pile. Like it would have been easy for an engineer to go in and build a rule that's like, if you see this length and this width, like swap them, right? And just like run it all the time and fix the problem. But nobody was ever going to do that. Instead, there was like a human being who owned cribs as a category who like once a month would go in and just like manually change everything. And so I think as a product manager, like figuring out how do you make that catalog management experience easy, whether it's for people who are in your organization or for your vendors, because at the end of the day, your customer isn't buying your checkout experience, right? Your customer is buying a product that you're selling, and your ability to help them understand that product, select a product, like feel confident in that purchase, especially if it's a high value purchase or a considered purchase, is really important. And I always felt that was particularly true at Wayfair, where, you know, we had high average order values, returns are very hard for large goods, damage rates are high on some of those products. You really want to make sure that the customer is buying the right product.
Makes a ton of sense. As we look to close up, Emily, do you have any parting pieces of advice or wisdom that you'd give to leaders that are maybe about to go into an extreme growth period, or they're in an extreme kind of growth period within D2C?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is just that growth is so exciting and it's such an amazing opportunity to learn. So like keep your learning hat on and you're going to get a ton out of it. I would also just say like focus on that adaptability, get good at giving things away. Right. One of the things that happens as you grow, and this happened to me many, many times, is like you'll own a whole big thing. And then tomorrow you own half of it. And then tomorrow you own half of that. And then you own half of that. And that can like, if you have an ego about it, that feels hard. That is just what happens at a company that is growing really fast. And get ready to like go deep, not wide, and to just enjoy like doing well at whatever piece of the puzzle that you have that day and whatever the company needs from you on that day or that week, knowing that it's probably going to change 3 months from now or 6 months from now.
Love it. Beautiful insights. Emily, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time and really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thanks.
The E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.